Beneath a sky heavy with swollen clouds, snow began its slow descent, each flake a silent witness to the town's restless breath. The streets of Grey Ridge, usually dusted in whispers of wind and grit, now lay softened under a thick, white blanket. Caleb Holt moved through the dim corridors of the old schoolhouse, his footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet that had seen generations pass, but bore the same worn stains. The faint creak of his broom against the linoleum was the only sound apart from the distant howl of winter's chill, pressing in on every window pane. His breath came steady and even, curling softly in the cold air like a secret he carried alone. The janitor's hands, calloused and quiet, moved with deliberate care. He was a man accustomed to this solitude, to the gentle rhythms of a world few noticed, scraping ice, the scent of damp wood, the faint aroma of worn leather from his coat. Outside, Rust, a stray dog with eyes like melted amber and a scar that told stories, waited patiently at the edge of the schoolyard, the snow catching in his tangled fur. Rust was more shadow than flesh, a silent companion bound by mutual endurance. Inside, the school was waking slowly. The echo of children's laughter and hurried footsteps was replaced by the whispers of those who worked in the background, like ghosts tethered to their tasks. Mrs. Nora Whitfield, an elderly custodian with silver hair gathered in a loose bun, moved slowly through the hallways, her frailty masked by a dignity that had never needed words. She paused by the cafeteria door where Eli Granger stood, his broad frame a sharp contrast against the muted surroundings. Eli's black belt was more than a title. It was a brand of intimidation in a town that whispered his name with a mixture of respect and fear. "You call that cleaning?" Eli sneered, voice rough as the winter wind. "Mrs. Whitfield, you're slowing us all down." Laughter bubbled from a small crowd of students and staff nearby, the sound brittle and cruel, like breaking ice. Caleb's eyes lifted from his mop, dark pools reflecting the fading light. There was no hurry in his steps as he approached Eli, no spark of anger, only a quiet insistence that something unseen demanded attention. "She's doing her best," Caleb said softly, voice steady as snow settling on the earth. "And that's enough." Eli's smirk deepened, the sort of expression born from years of wielding power like a weapon. "You got a problem with that, janitor? Maybe you want to prove your worth more than a mop and bucket." The words hung thick in the cold air. The townspeople, gathered in small clumps around the school gym, shifted their weight, sensing the brewing storm. Gossip would follow this moment like the winter shadows follow the dusk, unrelenting and sharp. Caleb didn't answer with words meant to wound. Instead, his gaze stayed firm, his presence a silent challenge. Eli's grin faltered for a heartbeat before he raised a fist in mock salute. "Tomorrow, the gym. Show me what you've got." The crowd exhaled, the tension rippling outward. Rumors would swirl like snowdrifts by morning. The janitor who dared to stand against the bully. The man who thought himself more than his station. Later, in the cold solitude of the cafe, Caleb sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a cup of bitter coffee. Outside, the wind rattled the window panes, and the pale light of dusk cast long shadows over the frost-lined streets. Lila Boone, the librarian whose soft eyes held the weight of stories never spoken aloud, approached quietly. She placed a steaming mug before him, without a word, the simple gesture carrying more warmth than the worn coat Caleb wore. He nodded once, gratitude unspoken but understood. Around them, whispers floated like drifting snowflakes, snippets of conversation laced with judgment. "Who does he think he is? A Navy SEAL hiding in plain sight, some say." The rumors traveled faster than the snow melted on the rooftops. Rust padded into the cafe's entryway, nose twitching at the scent of roast and hearth. Shopkeepers barked sharp warnings, trying to shoo him away. But Caleb rose and slipped a piece of bread from his own meal into the dog's waiting mouth. The small act was a quiet rebellion against the coldness that sought to surround them both. Night pressed heavy when Caleb returned to the school. The wind had grown fierce, howling through cracks and eaves. In the stillness, he stood by the window, eyes tracing the path the snow had carved across the empty playground. His mind drifted back to a time when the battles were louder, the stakes higher, and the world less forgiving. But here, beneath the surface of this sleepy town, he felt the weight of unseen chains, the judgment, the isolation, the cold that seeped into the soul. Despite it all, Caleb moved forward. He repaired a broken chair in the library without fanfare, steady hands coaxing Wood back to life. He helped a child retrieve gloves lost in a snowbank, his smile brief but genuine. With each small kindness, he wove threads of grace into the town's fabric, unseen but felt. Lila watched him from behind a stack of books, her gaze softening with every gesture. In the quiet moments shared over books and coffee, a slow and delicate understanding blossomed, not with grand words, but in the gentle touch of presence. Their connection was a dance of glances and half-smiles, a silent acknowledgement that healing could begin in the smallest of acts. The night before the match, a storm cloaked the town in deeper white, snow piling against doors and windows like forgotten memories. Caleb sat alone by a crackling fire, muscles loose from careful preparation. His thoughts traced the outline of his past, battles fought in silence, ghosts never named. This challenge was not for glory but for peace. The snow outside whispered promises of change, if only he had the strength to claim it. As dawn broke over Grey Ridge, the town awoke beneath a pale sky, breath held in the cold air. The gym doors creaked open, and footsteps echoed through the stillness. The waiting crowd buzzed with anticipation, the whispers already beginning anew. But Caleb moved with quiet resolve, a man no longer defined by others, but by the calm fire within. Rust lingered outside, eyes fixed on the figure stepping into the light, snowflakes melting gently on his coat. Lila found her seat near the back, heart steady though her hands trembled slightly. The winter day held its breath, the moment pregnant with possibility. The first section closes with Caleb standing alone in the center of the gym, the weight of the town's judgment pressing like the cold against his skin. Yet beneath it all, a quiet flame burns, waiting to be kindled. The gym's hollow silence stretched taut as the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind Caleb, muffling the winter's breath. Light spilled in pale shards through high windows, casting long, cold shadows across the polished floor. Eyes lined the bleachers, their whispers folding into the stillness like a gathering storm beneath the surface. Eli Granger stood at the far end, the crowd's unspoken champion, his black belt tight and unyielding like the winter's grip. Caleb's stance was steady, calm, not a man eager to fight, but one who had carried battles far more burdensome in silence. His gaze swept the room, catching Lila's quiet presence at the back, her breath barely visible in the chill air. And outside, through the cracked window, rusts were ruffled by the cold wind. The dog's patient eyes seemed to hold the weight of the world, as if he too understood the reckoning to come. Eli's voice cut through the silence like a whip, sharp and laced with arrogance. "You sure you want to do this, Janitor? This isn't a mob fight." Caleb answered not with words, but with a slow, deliberate breath, a breath that held years of restraint and the calm of someone who had learned when to strike and when to simply stand. The first move came swift, like the snap of ice breaking beneath heavy feet. Eli lunged, fists weaving through the cold air, a storm desperate to prove its strength. Caleb shifted, a shadow slipping past the blows, his movements measured and spare, like a whisper against the roar. The gym seemed to slow. Every strike met not with fury, but with quiet control. The tension tightened, not in the shouts or gasps, but in the space between them, silent as snowfall. The crowd's anticipation flickered as Eli's confidence wavered. He pushed harder, anger flaring, but Caleb's defense was a dance of grace and patience. He caught Eli's arm mid-swing and, instead of striking back, eased the tension, guiding the larger man's momentum to the floor with a gentleness that shattered expectations. Eli landed with a heavy thud, breath escaping in a startled gasp, eyes wide not with pain but disbelief. Caleb knelt beside him, voice soft as winter dusk. "I've buried too many men to want to be another." The room hushed, the weight of those words settling like frost on the crowd's conscience. Among them, an older man shifted, recognition flickering behind his eyes. The truth surfaced slowly, a tide breaking through ice. Caleb Holt, the quiet janitor, was not who he seemed. He was a man forged in the harshest fires, a Navy SEAL whose battles had carved silence into his soul. The revelation hung in the air, rippling through the gathered faces like a sudden thaw. Gossip turned to awe, judgment softened by the raw, undeniable truth. The power balance shifted, not with a violent blow, but with the dignity of a man who had already faced his worst and chosen mercy. Eli's breath steadied. Slowly, he reached a hand toward Caleb, a gesture heavy with reluctant respect. Caleb grasped it firmly, helping the man to his feet without a trace of bitterness. The crowd exhaled collectively, the tension dissolving into a quiet hum of acceptance. Mrs. Whitfield stepped forward, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Caleb," she whispered, voice trembling. The smallest acts of kindness, once dismissed, were now seen as the true strength beneath the man's quiet exterior. Outside, Rust wandered in without hesitation, his scarred ear twitching as he settled at Caleb's feet. The barriers that once kept the stray and the outcast at bay crumbled under the weight of newfound respect. The winter wind softened, and even the cold seemed to hold its breath in reverence. Lila joined Caleb as they stepped into the falling snow, their footsteps marking fresh paths in the untouched drifts. There were no grand declarations between them, only the gentle closeness of shared silence and understanding. The world around them felt fragile, like the fragile beauty of a snowflake caught in a warm hand. Caleb looked toward the horizon, where the pale sun struggled against the gray sky. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the fiercest battles aren't fought with fists, but with the courage to simply stand." Lila smiled, her eyes reflecting the quiet hope blooming between them. The snow continued to fall, a whisper of grace on a world slowly learning to forgive. If you've been moved by Caleb's story, a tale of quiet strength, resilience, and the small acts that change everything, please subscribe to Whispered Tales. There are more stories waiting, stories that remind us all that even in the coldest winters, warmth can be found in the gentlest gestures. Stay with us, and let these whispered memories linger in your heart.